Okay, you ready to roll?
Yes.
All right, welcome everybody to the Community and Economic Development Committee meeting. Mandy, you want to do roll call?
Mr. Whittleton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Salato?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. You want to go around the table real quick? We got Dean Gates.
Dean Gates is in the council.
Meg Zalatow.
Felix Rivera.
I think we got that.
Oh.
So we just did the roll call.
Oh, sorry. We're so in the habit of it. It's like someone said their name, say your name.
Chris Sherry, Director of Econ Community Development.
Ryan Yell, Planning Department.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Go ahead, Dave.
Dane Wyrick, all back out, Dane Jordan.
Jamie Martin, interpreter. Amanda Lucas, JDW Council.
Jenna Welty, DW Council.
Snotty Warden, Nebraska.
Bob Dole, building official.
Jeffrey Hickman, Health Department.
Elaine T. Bellardry, Code Enforcement Officer.
Jed Smith, AMCO.
Rich Byrne, Code Enforcement.
Mark Elder, North Star Community Conference.
Stephen Buckton, Anchorage Police.
Richard Henning, Anchorage Police.
Kathy Louisa, Attorney of the City Council.
All right, thanks. And you guys are with-
And Delegate Peterson from Nebraska.
Christina Hoff, Nebraska.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first off, we have, and I guess any changes to the agenda? Oh. Okay, we're good with it. Okay, so first off is, regards renewing marijuana establishment licenses with notices of violation, and it wasn't all of them with notices of violation, but we had two that jumped out as having quite a number. One was Alaska Sense, and we have some people here, and Danish Gardens, we got Dane Wyrick here, and Rich Fern, and Jed. Jed, a lot of these are state. Could you maybe come up and... Do you have a preference in this stuff? Danish Gardens. Okay, so do you want to start with Danish Gardens? Dave, do you want to, you can sit up here if you want. Oh, we probably squeeze in a chair. Okay, so generally on these meetings, I think it's an opportunity for assembly members to chat amongst ourselves with the public there, so we meet the Open Meetings Act and so on. So, would think that, like Dane, if you want to speak, raise your hand. I'll point to you. We try to avoid kind of cross conversations and so on, so we'll go around that way. So, I guess I'd ask. I guess a lot of these are metric violations. And is that something? Can you talk about that, Ted? Looking at Danish Garden, are you familiar enough to?
I'm not intimately familiar with these particular violations. I didn't come prepared to speak on this, but I can speak generally on metric if there are questions. I'm sure there are other people in the room that could do that as well. But the metric is it's kind of it's the inventory tracking system. It's kind of the cornerstone of the program. And it's our seed to sale tracking program for monitoring for things like diversion. It's pretty critical to the whole AMCO program.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, never mind. So did you have metric violations, Dane?
I'm not aware of any metric violations
Okay,
at
I'm
all
sorry.
we've received.
No, that was my bad. It was the Alaska Sense had those. So I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so Rich, we had.
We did the inspection on the drug facility last month, and prior to that, we had some older violations, but those are quite dated, and I think that's been adjudicated and resolved, and we haven't had any problems with Mr. Wyer's facility in quite some time. did the inspection, on the cultivation, and the retail, and most, passed just fine.
Okay. So it's just, we have a lot of odor violations and now we don't.
Correct. Mr. Wire retained the services of a professional engineer and resolved the issues, and we have not had an odor complaint from his facility since.
So we could say this was a success in the process.
I believe so, yes.
John,
Forrest?
there is one metric violation from June, but I think it had to do with the mislabeling of things. Maybe it's not metric. I don't know. But it's the second to last NOV. So yeah, it looks like plants from room B were relocated to bedroom A, but still showed up on metric as being in B. I mean, I think that speaks to the remarkable degree of regulation that we have on these facilities.
Any comments? Dave?
That was just simply an oversight of plants that got moved from literally one room to a room right next door to it. And at the time they did the inspection, they had not been recorded from one room to the other. However, in the recording for metric, it showed that the plants that were in one room were now in another room. They just had not been recorded as being moved, but there was nothing where a plant was missing or anything like that. It just simply had not been recorded yet. There was nothing more to it than that.
Okay. Okay, Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, just going back to the odor violation, so there are two NOVs on January 22nd of this year and February 6th of this year. Both when enforcement went out to look at these, they detected a strong odor of marijuana. Could you please explain these two and then what you've done since to rectify? Because I'm not seeing any sense, which is a good sign to me.
Are you asking me that?
Yeah.
Well, at that time, code enforcement said we had smell. We had our engineers out there. We devised some new and additional odor remediation equipment, and since then, we've had no smell. So, I mean, it's marijuana smells. It's just a fact of life. We legalized it in this town, and we do what we can to take care of the odor, but we can't. It's really hard for us to establish what is acceptable and not acceptable when the code is so vague as to say that if I can smell it, you're guilty. There's no proof that it's coming from you. There's no proof that it's actually marijuana. But if I say it smells like marijuana, then it's marijuana. That goes to pretty much to say the same thing as if a cop comes up to you and says, well, I think I smell alcohol on your breath, so I'm going to go ahead and take your license and your car and throw you in jail for DUI, but we have no proof of anything. So with that said, they make the accusation, we comply with the accusation. We spend thousands of dollars to bring engineers in to see what's wrong with it. They add something, and in this case, we added a few ozone makers into our ventilation stack, a few more than we had, and it apparently cleared up the problem. So it's not like we're doing anything intentionally or intentionally not trying to rectify a situation. We cannot possibly know what the amount of odor is coming out of our facility without some scientific background testing that says how many parts per million are escaping from your facility. There's nothing in the code that says that. So it's almost impossible for us to say that it's 100% remedied when simply 10 people can say I don't smell anything, and then Rich can come in and say, well, I do, and now we're guilty.
Well, yeah, thank you for...
Mr. Chair, put me in the queue, please.
Be done.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for all the investments that you did make to help rectify the situation. I know that this is something the committee has grappled with of how do we need to evolve that section of code. So I leave that up to the wisdom of the co-chairs.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, it's amazing, you know, I heard this, Rich say the thing's been corrected, and then this licensee gets up there and tells us that basically we're bad operators because we're trying to essentially hold up the law. And the commitment that's been made by every operator is that the smells will not be blowing off the property past the property line, and most of them have achieved that. And so, you know, I am in some ways shocked to hear the argument that, well, this isn't really our problem, the law is bad. That to me is not an acceptable answer. Thankfully, the violations have been addressed, so we don't really have any action we need to take. But to any licensee out there, you have a responsibility to ensure that you aren't blowing the smell of marijuana across your neighbor's properties, period and full stop.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks. Any more on this?
Well, just
Pete?
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just, you know, it's hard to be perfect every day. You know, we all attempt to do our best, but some days we're better than others. And so, I mean, we have set an unbelievably high standard for these cultivators and these operators. And sometimes it's real hard to get over that hurdle. And when they make the investments to make improvements, and then you have 6 or 8 months without any violations, then you got to pat them on the back and say, good job.
Thank you. Forrest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rich, could you remind me, you know, I know when we had the issue with Alaska Sense last year, and eventually the decision was made to shut them down for a period, you know, there was a discussion about different levels of violations, and, you know, we don't want to give the death penalty to businesses all the time, but is there a fine scheme? So in addition to us threatening their license or their, you know, for if there are these multiple odor violations, do you have the ability to fine them?
Yes, any fine of Title 21 is $300 per offense per day.
Okay.
And I just wanted to remind the Assembly folks, and I know there's some new folks that weren't here before when we've talked about this, but what we've done to commit, so it's not just you drive by and you catch a small whiff of marijuana. We're not going to right off the bat come down and write a ticket. What we committed to do is our section law as land use enforcement is, before we write a citation or do a citation for an odor issue, there'll be 2 of us in place for 15 minutes, and we'll also contact the on-duty manager of the facility before we do a citation. So if we understand, and I think we've talked about it before, about you're always going to get a little bit of escape. Somebody goes to take the garbage out through a drying room or a harvest room or something, you're going to get a little bit of escape. But once you close the door, it's going to go away. So that's why we've committed to that 15-minute window that we're going to stay in place, 2 of our officers, and make contact with the folks on site. And that's what we've been doing.
All right, thank you.
Any more? No, I mean, I guess I would just note that it's not like this is without consequences for them. You know, even if we reapprove the license, they still have to pay the fines. That, to me, for the relatively minor violations, provides an additional level of comfort.
All right, thanks. So, Mandy, what's the status of this license now?
They are still under review, but they're scheduled for the September 10th assembly meeting currently.
So it's September 10th for us. What's the status of the state?
I'm not sure when they're going before the state board for renewal. Do you have a date scheduled for
We
that
have not.
yet? So we've received the deemed completed renewal applications for Danish Gardens from the state. So as far as our requirements, they're good.
Okay. Okay, so at our next assembly meeting, this will be, we pulled it out from the broad list of renewals.
Yeah.
And then set it up for public hearing on the 10th. So do we want a recommendation from the committee on that?
I'll make a recommendation.
Which would be?
I move that we approve.
Okay, any second?
Second.
Second, any opposition? Okay, so you know how this goes. So we pulled yours out. We had a whole bunch together of renewals, and then some that had, we thought jumped out with some issues. We pulled out yours in Alaska Sense. So it'll have a public hearing at our next meeting. But the committee will recommend approval, but we're just part of 11 people to go up for a vote. So hopefully, could you be there on the 10th?
Presumably.
Okay. Anything else on this? All right, thanks. Okay, so next one is Alaska Sense.
Mr. Chair,
Chris?
I just wanted to note for the record that on Friday I met with a number of people at the at the 49th State, and the licensee was at the table. We did not discuss this license renewal, though.
For Alaska Sense?
Yeah, just as a form of disclosure, I just want to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Alaska Sense had metric issues, and there's a building CCO issue. So I guess we could start again. Are you just looking at this for the first time, Jed?
Yeah, actually.
Okay. Maybe we'll go to Jana. Why don't you go ahead? So we have Marty Ward and Jana Welty join us at the table.
Sure. So the metric issues were again from the accusation hearing, and we went through a full audit with the enforcement with the state, and no additional findings were found from that. So there wasn't any diversion found from any of those metric issues or anything like that. It was more of just lack of knowing how to use it properly. Self-reported. That was that was later on. The self-reported one was later on. So it was just lack of understanding exactly how to use it, and so that has pretty much been remedied, except for the January 17th, 2019 metric violation. You'll see at the back of your packet. I don't know, it's in here 3 times. It was just one NOV though.
Yeah, for some reason.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't 3 different NOVs, just one NOV. It was a self-reported, because basically my advice to them is, when in doubt, let's just ask enforcement. Let's just be transparent about everything so there's no miscommunication in the future. And so it was a mistake. It was entered as ounces and it should have been entered as grams. They called AMCO enforcement to figure out how to fix it. They fixed it. They got a violation for it. I responded for them on their behalf. And other than the CCO issue, which I'm sure Rich is going to talk about, which is the site plan that we've been working on with Steve Landtech from Landtech. It's from Landtech, that's just the whole name of the architect company. We're working on the site plan. It should be submitted to Ryan this week, if not today, then tomorrow. The issue was we needed to, the original site plan that the architect did, that was a different architect, it wasn't physically possible to be implemented on site. And I'm sure Rich, you can probably talk more about this. And then the other issue is we had to get an access agreement, which we just got a draft of today between the Muni and the building owner, and so hopefully that will get signed and recorded too. And then did you want to add some stuff on the site plan?
No, that's like, you covered that, Mr. Chair, as far as the original site plan was basically, it was impossible to build the issue is the sidewalk, as far as the graded sidewalk for handicap access. It was too steep. The site just didn't allow for the construction of the plan the way it was submitted. We've been bringing this to their attention for quite some time, and on July 8th we did a letter reminding them that their CCO was going to expire on the 15th of August. And the CCO has already been extended 3 times. So on the 15th of August, their CCO for the occupancy of the building was expired, was no good. So what we did is we actually cited Ms. Warden for occupying the building without having a valid CCO.
Okay.
And also we had done their inspections for the cultivation and retail. And so what we did is we were holding off hoping the CCO would be taken care of by the 15th, and it wasn't. And so we protested their license on the inspection tickets for the 2 particular retail and cultivation.
Any thoughts? So what is the, so you cited them about the CCO's expired.
CCO's expired.
So what's the impact on the operation?
Well, it's a violation of this code section 2105.055A8. It's specific, saying that any marijuana facility has to have a valid certificate of zoning compliance, and in this case, that is the certificate of occupancy from the building official. Well, right now, they do not have a certificate of occupancy from the building official to occupy the building. So they've been cited so far for 7 days, and they would be subject to a fine for every day that they're in the building without a CCO.
Okay, so there's $300 a day fine. Right, is that right?
Correct.
So this all has to do with the site plan. So it doesn't actually have to do with the building, as Rich was indicating, it has to do with the site plan and not having the valid site plan approved by the zoning department, planning, and traffic. Right, traffic. And so that is supposed to be submitted this week. There was some back and forth with the Steve from Land Tech with the Muni. I guess he was working with the Muni official that is no longer with the Muni on the access plan, and there was a lot of issues with the Department of Transportation and the pedestrian access. And I'm sure I'm going to misstate things, it's not my area of expertise, but that's my understanding. But it seems like we've got most of those issues resolved. It just needs to be submitted, and the landowner needs to sign off on the access agreement.
Okay, let me, Bob Dole.
I'm Bob Dole, I am the building official. A certificate of occupancy or a conditional certificate of occupancy is required by Title 23. It's incorporated by reference into that section of Title 21. Without a valid CO or CCO, you can't lawfully occupy the building. It's in violation of municipal ordinance and ongoing occupation or use of it until this matter is resolved in terms of the legal impact of that. It isn't presenting an immediately dangerous situation that we would send out code abatement to go board it up. However, it is not a lawful occupation because it's not been through the full process of those reviews for safety of the occupants and safety for BJ's and Aaron's.
Do you have a question for Bob?
I do. So you mentioned, thank you, Bob. So you mentioned that boarding it up. So it sounds like preventing occupancy is one remedy. Do you also have a fine scheme for something like this, you know, a per day fine schedule or anything like that?
Oh, the fine schedule is kicked in under Title 21. We will not board up for a lack of a CO or CCO unless we become aware that in the process there is a dangerous condition that's not being abated. A board up or order to cease use or vacate we would use for a known dangerous condition. Now it's just an unknown condition, if you will, without the CO.
Can I ask a follow-up, Mr. Jerry? Thank you. How much are they being fined a day right now?
Rich, I believe it's
$300.
$300
a day.
$300 per day, and we've charged 7 days, but they are subject to $300 per day until another CO is issued.
So, can I ask a follow-up? On September, this comes back before us on September 10th, is that right?
This one, that's the 24th.
Oh, is it the 24th?
Is this the 24th?
So we were waiting on some of the department reviews to get back. As I've gotten them, they've been tentatively scheduled based off of the 60-day deadline to get back to the state regarding the state marijuana license protest but if they get all of their stuff in sooner from the departments, we'll try and move them up and get it done sooner. So they could potentially be on the 10th now that we've received stuff back from land use enforcement.
But these fines aren't related to our action, that's related, I mean, you get your site plan approved,
It is.
get your CO.
Well, it's true, except that we generally incorporate things like unpaid taxes, for example. And that's what I was going to ask about. Are these kind of fines or these unpaid fines part of the renewal process in that sense? Or can we at least know when it comes up before us if they have resolved this issue?
So typically, we don't receive notice of fines and fees based off of like building violations or fire violations. Those kind of stay within the departments that issue them, and so ours is more like property tax, personal tax. But with the certification requirements from the reviewing departments, land use enforcement is one of them. As they said, they've objected to the renewal of the licenses. And so that would be documented on the AR saying certification has not been received. It must be received prior to the license being issued. And this is how it's typically worded in all of the other ARs.
Mr. Chair.
Anything else?
No.
All right, Chris?
Thanks. I don't have all the documents before me. I understand that there's no certificate of occupancy expired and that there are some issues with the structure as is can't be authorized. What are the fundamental problems that are underpinning this lack of a certificate of occupancy? What's making the problem?
Through the chair, it's the site plan. It's the site plan that was submitted to the state with the original application and the site plan that was approved by the planning department in the assembly when the licensee initially was licensed.
Yeah, so what happened was, Chris, we had a different architect, and I don't think he must not have physically gone to the site, because what he drew and what traffic approved and what planning approved and zoning approved and you all approved was a site plan that just physically cannot be implemented. So we're having to go through a different system, having to deal with the state and the DOT department, having to get a shared access agreement with the Muni for back access. Access on the back part of the property. And so that's why this has happened. And it, I've been on, Steve at Landtech to get this kind of done, but, it just didn't get done in time.
But I think fundamentally it was a sidewalk, ADA sidewalk was an issue.
Sidewalk and landscaping, it wasn't.
Okay, so it's not a fundamental safety issue or some other element that we're talking about.
Correct.
Thank you.
And what's the shared access? Do you back up to a...
Yeah, we
an
back up to
alley, don't you?
Muni property, and I'm not totally versed on it. I thought maybe you would know more about it. You don't know about that? Okay, so I just got last night, a shared access agreement between the landowner and the city, because I believe it's Muni land back there. And so I think we need an access agreement with the Muni. I could be saying this wrong, but I think this is what's the case, and that allows us to access the back part of the property. That's my understanding. That's my understanding. I'll send it to Rich Noying so they can see.
When you say back, do you mean that north side, away from 2?
Yeah, I'm hesitant to talk too much about it because I just got it last night and I haven't fully read through why we need the back access agreement. You don't know any more than what I've said, huh? On that? No. Yeah. It's some kind of access agreement that the Muni says that we need to access the back portion.
I would speculate, Mr. Chairman, that that's probably through the traffic department.
Definitely through traffic department, yeah.
I've not been made aware of that, and I think Mr. GL is indicating he's not aware of it either.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess from our thing, I mean, you're paying fines for the
Correct.
not having it ready, and then
We haven't paid them yet, but we just got served with them a couple days ago.
for our approval comes up and for public hearing on your renewal on September 24th. Do you expect to have this done and then we're fairly clean?
Well, yeah, this should be done, like I said before, Steve finally has the site plan ready to submit, and so it should get submitted this week, and first to you, and then you'll circulate it through your departments, and then I'll follow up with Elaine and Rich on the access agreement. I'll send them what I got. Like I said, I apologize, I'm not fully versed on why we need that, but I'll send it out to these guys.
So is that realistic time frame? I don't know, to Brian or Bob, to have a site plan approved in that 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks?
Through the chair, from a Title 23 perspective for building safety, it is a reasonable time frame.
Mr. Chair, that works for me too. That's a minor mod, I can usually get it done. We'll give ourselves 30 days max, but I can usually get it done.
Okay, good.
So you're saying we have to do a minor modification? I thought you said that we didn't have to do a modification to the special land use.
It's a modification of the site plan, so yes.
Oh.
Mine would be minor mod.
So you need
Okay,
a minor
work that out later.
modification
Pete,
for me?
did you have a comment? Okay, so any thoughts from the committee on this? What do you want to do? Forrest?
I recommend holding off on a recommendation
Okay.
and seeing if these issues have been resolved when it comes back before us.
So we don't need a recommendation.
Yeah.
I mean, if it comes back on the 24th, it's a public hearing, and you've got site plan resolved, then the protest would be lifted. A reason for the protest is gone. And no, we don't see any big issue, metric issues that are here. So,
I have a question, may I, please? How did we manage to approve a site plan that's not physically possible to be implemented at a location? That seems like something that shouldn't happen, so I'm kind of curious about how that happened. Because, and I guess the follow-up question is, isn't the site plan supposed to go into operation when the building goes into operation, the business goes into operation?
So I can speak to some of that. So we have to take the engineers and the professionals at their word. When they say, we're going to build it this way, we say, build it that way. This meets code. This particular instance, the traffic department went out, actually did some measurements, came back, and at the time of initial review, again, this was like 3 years ago, so I'm jogging my memory here, but I believe they said they may have some difficulty in constructing that pedestrian walkway. It turns out they have a lot of difficulty in constructing that pedestrian walkway. As far as anything building safety-wise, Bob might be able to touch on that, but essentially that's what it boils down to. If you show us a plan that works for us and meets code, we are bound to kind of approve that because it meets the standard.
Interesting.
but if it's unbuildable, you'll find out when you go to inspect it. When they come in, because you can open with a conditional certificate of occupancy. That's not unusual. But like your landscaping, if you open up in September, but put landscaping there next summer, that's pretty common. So, but eventually someone will go look and go, oh, that doesn't work, right?
That's correct, and that's a great point about the landscaping. There's certain things, say they get their license issued to them in December, but we're not going to require them to strike the parking lot and install their landscaping in the middle of the winter. So they'll get the conditional certificate of occupancy that says it's safe to occupy the building, you can open up your business, you can operations, but you have to take care of those items by X date, which is typically August for landscaping.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Anything else on this?
Just one
Jana?
question. Through the chair, Manny, so is it for sure the 24th, not the 10th?
It's for sure the 24th right now, based off of the deadline. We kind of believe that, but yeah, right
So
now.
it's not going to change the 10th?
It doesn't have to, if you prefer that one.
Well, I just want to.
It gives you the time to do
know.
it. So yeah.
I mean, having more time would be nice, just in case something happens.
Yeah. We can keep it on the 24th.
Okay, anything else? Okay, so,
Sure.
Rick?
The CCO can be extended, like, we're on the third extension. The reason we did the protest and the citation is we just weren't seeing any activity. Ms. Wharton can come in and apply for an application of the CO, and that will resolve that as far as housekeeping. So the CCO is obtainable, they just have to go make her application. It's doable. So that's the only reason we got to this point, is we just were not seeing any action on resolving the site plan.
We thought it was going to be done by the architect and submitted prior to the 15th. Just wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was pushing for it throughout the summer, and really, from my knowledge, I thought it was done. And I apologize. I know we had discussions, but I tried to get it done before the due date, and I was very surprised that it wasn't done when I got the email a couple of days ago.
Okay. But it sounds like you're on a path to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
You've got quite a few weeks here before you come up for hearing, and you can operate until then. You just have fines.
They can, Mr. Chair, they can walk out of the building today with the
Okay.
CCO, extended CCO.
Well, while you're here,
Yeah.
let's root for that.
But we still have fines to take care of.
Okay, so anything else on this then? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Okay, so next up is discussion regarding ordinance 2019-103 for on-site marijuana consumption going to ballot proposition. And we had a work session last Thursday. We sent in some questions. Did you get more questions?
I didn't get any more, it was just the list.
Okay, so I printed out, this is 15 copies.
I think you, Chris, you got a few, right, to deal with throughout the department. So, Mr. Weddleton, Chris Schutte got a few from like other departments to deal with it, but none from assembly members.
I didn't get questions, I got answers.
Did you get this? Did you get this list? I just made notes in our work session.
I got it through the chair. Yes, this list went, as far as I can tell, this is the list that clerk's office sent out in the meeting invitation, as well as in a note to all the assembly members to submit any additional questions to us. I got 0 from assembly members or otherwise.
Okay, so would it be productive then, just because these came up at the work session, to go through your answers on any of these?
Yeah, we'd be happy to. So we have representative from planning, building safety, health department, code enforcement, and 2 officers from the police department here to help answer these today.
Were there enough copies for everyone?
Yes.
Okay. And this is just, these questions are just, I was making notes at the work session. So it's not saying this is all inclusive, it's just kind of a jumping off point. And I guess, so we'll go through those, but maybe Felix or Forrest can cover other meetings that we'll have on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think a number of these questions are not really appropriate for the CED committee. We can talk about them, but get health department's policy on edibles. My understanding is that the folks wanted to have a discussion in the health policy committee. They've asked to go to that.
So through the chair, I believe the clerk's office has distributed 4 documents from the health department as it relates to on-site consumption of edibles. One is the quote policy statement, which, just to remind everyone, there is no policy statement. The health department spoke neither in favor or against. But looking ahead, I know that the health committee will take this up. Because of the amount of bandwidth required in the health department to do that kind of work, the sooner the better, and Jeff can certainly back me up here, but the director asked yesterday, they can probably churn out policy statements once a quarter. So you get one shot at this. Let's try and front load it as quickly as we can so that Tasha and her team can do a good job of analyzing it.
Okay, who's health committee?
Don't know.
I think it's,
France.
Austin and Suzanne.
yeah.
And is that scheduled, the health committee? Or they just said?
I think they were going to schedule a special meeting for this one.
They're okay. And then, were you aware of other meetings, public safety?
Yeah, we had talked about public safety, but I don't know if we have the co-chairs here. I don't know if they've decided on what to do with that.
I don't think it would be the September meeting because first I'm going to be on the Sister Cities Commission, and also we have already scheduled the in-and-out liquor issue.
Yep.
I think is going to consume that.
Yeah, likely. Yeah.
So we could schedule a special meeting, or we could have the October meeting. I think this is so. I mean, I think the intent is to have public hearing on the 10th, and then extend it. Extend public hearing out to October or November.
Okay, and that works.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
If we're going to schedule a special health policy meeting and we're going to schedule a special public safety committee meeting, I think that we should consider scheduling them back to back.
Or simultaneous or something.
Essentially.
Yeah. Does that make sense to people?
Yep.
I mean, it does get, having multiple separate meetings will get redundancy and calling staff out multiple times.
Yeah. So we'll have to meet with Austin Susanna on that. So probably either late September or early October for that.
Yeah, does that, Mandy, that works to,
Do joint like that?
we've done that before. Okay, that's a good idea, Chris, thanks.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, when these instructions or directions are communicated to both those committees, I believe, I'm going to speak a little bit on APDs we have, but I believe APD should be at both, or the joint meeting, since they can speak to both public health and public safety issues. Is that fair?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So do you want to go through, you have some answers, you want to review those now?
Sure, happy to go through those if you'd like. So the list that, we'll probably digress from this list at some point, but we'll start with the broad list on that you provided. So one of the first, I don't remember if this was a question or comment, but one of the first notes on here was perhaps including some limit to room size. I'll let Ryan Yell and Mandy speak to both the current Title 10 and 21 provisions about the on-site consumption area. I assume that's what this was about. I don't recall the question. So if you guys want to chime in on that.
Sure. Mr. Chair, so limiting room size is kind of a tricky one because you have to have a definitive reason for why 600 square feet is more impactful than 550 square feet. I think we can all agree if you were to take a building the size of the Sullivan Arena and pack it full and give everybody a joint and light up, that's probably not a safe situation for multiple reasons. But if everybody's in a room such as this size and it's a lounge area, it's properly ventilated, there can be safe ways of operating in that space. So the way that we have it in code right now is it's all based upon percentages. So if you were to first and foremost, apply for the on-site consumption endorsement, and then if you were to expand that on-site consumption area more than 20%, then it would have to go back to the assembly for approval, rather than being a modification that's administratively approved. So that would be my recommendation, would be to keep it under the current rules without having a room size limit.
Okay, thank you. Forrest?
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Yao. Just to be clear, though, anytime you have an endorsement for on-site consumption, it doesn't matter how much you're increasing size, what you're staying within the retail space, and do site plan and all that again. Yeah, it's just if you're modifying from an already approved endorsement in the 20% that you're referring to.
That's correct. So yeah, that's a good point to clarify. So for your initial on-site consumption endorsement, regardless of size, you always have to go to the assembly. It's once you have that on-site consumption endorsement and you are expanding it by more than 20% of the original area, that type of modification would have to go back to the assembly. Anything less than that could be administratively approved.
Great, thank you. I think Forrest?
Yeah, I appreciate what Mr. Yelly said, and I agree certainly that I don't think some arbitrary limit on room size is the way to go. Every one of these will come before us to get the endorsement, and if you have specific public safety concerns about the size of and location of a particular area, you can articulate them then, but they have to be based on some legitimate public policy. It can't just be because I think this is too big. The example that Ryan gave about the Sullivan Arena is kind of funny because I think we do have concerts in the Sullivan Arena where we allow alcohol consumption. I could be mistaken. Chris is nodding yes. So we don't allow people to have a joint in their hand. We could have every single person in the Sullivan Arena could have a beer in their hand, and we've decided that's okay. Yeah, but practically speaking, I do not believe it's going to happen because, like you said, it has to happen within the existing retail space. And I don't know what the largest, and then they can expand the retail space. I don't know what the largest current retail space in Anchorage is, but I would wager it's significantly smaller than 49 State Brewery, for example, where you can have consumption of alcohol on 4 floors simultaneously. Yeah. Well, there's the top roof deck, and then there's above. Yeah. I believe Cameron was the one that raised this. He's not here today, but I guess I agree. I think that it should be done through the endorsement process and through the existing percentage, retail. It's already difficult to get a retail license for marijuana. So.
thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say maybe as we work into some of these larger meetings with the rest of the body, if we kind of know what the average size or kind of what the sizes of retail establishments are, I think that'll be a great data point for us to have and for us to be communicating out to the public. I know they're not gigantic because they've all had to be remodeled with cash and a lot of other things. So that would be great to have. Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can provide that. One of the things that you're going to hear me say repeatedly today is there are new data points that we will begin to regularly collect and make part of our broader data picture about marijuana retail establishments. To the issue of room size and Sullivan Arena example, I just want to remind folks that you're not allowed to consume marijuana in municipal facilities, so that would never happen. But imagine that prohibition did not exist. It is going to ultimately be the fire code that dictates the room size because of the combustion that's occurring when you're consuming by inhalation, traditional inhalation. So the idea of a artificial limit on room size, or the concern that without an artificial limit that they could be unregulated, I think that's not a valid concern given that there are a number of other codes separate from municipal code that all of these retail establishments have to live by, and the fire code will ultimately be a big one. Also, to both Mr. Yell and Mr. Dunbar's points, we just don't know how much space an operator is first willing to give up to do on-site consumption, because every square foot they give up, they're giving up retail space. You're a retailer, maybe it's more valuable to keep the retail space, I don't know. But we don't have the answer. I think the entrepreneurs that do this business need to figure it out themselves.
I had a question on the fire code issue. Would it be possible, or something we may want to explore, could someone apply for an endorsement for vaping only or a non-combustible product versus actual lighter version, or is it all going to apply equally?
Through the chair, for the fire code applies to all commercial structures, if they're vaping, smoking, or not. And specifically, looking at the fire code, chapter 10 is going to look at that use area, and it's going to, the size of it will, and the arrangement of furniture inside are two of the factors you look at. Then you look at the number of egress routes, the width of the egress, the distance of the egress. We could spend the rest of the day talking about chapter 10. But International Fire Code Chapter 10 will define the maximum carrying load in there, and if you add smoking in there, or other combustion, then we also deal with the ventilation system as part of that discussion too. An important caveat, IFC Section 310 prohibits smoking where conditions are such to make it a hazard, such as a place with flammable or combustible materials. So the design and the way the room is furnished is going to have to minimize the flame risk. Building and fire codes are reticent about adding fuels and sources of ignition.
So no shag carpeting.
Mr. Chair.
Chris?
Thank you. Just from a philosophical perspective, I understand that there is a strong desire to nail down every detail possible to the where you can put a tack in the wall. But I think that we should also be careful so as not to prescribe so much that we create an absurd question on the ballot. And I think that I philosophically trust the voters to make the right determination. And I know that there are a number of people who are going to argue, no, let's take all the time we can to make this perfectly, exactly, precisely every detail what we want. But we reserve the right as an assembly over time to continue improving whatever code is established if the voters should vote on this. And so I like that we're having these conversations. I also am going to argue towards let's keep this as narrowly constructed and effective as possible.
All right, thank you. Okay, we done with room size, Chris? Oh, Mandy, I'm sorry.
Part of with what Brian was saying about the modification, there had been a discussion earlier on when it was just the edibles of potentially having the endorsements go before the assembly for their first time renewals, similar to the licenses. So that's been an AR that the clerk's office is working on. And so that's another opportunity to address if there have been a year of operations, there's issues, you'll have that opportunity to address those with public hearing, similar to how we've done with the renewals, the first time renewals.
What's the reasoning behind doing a separate one for that endorsement when isn't their license going to come back up before us anyway, and when they sort of have the endorsement attached?
So this is for the first time renewal of their endorsement. So there are going to be a few establishments who are 3-4 years in with their license renewal, so they won't have public hearings set.
Oh, I see.
So this is
it's
just
not
their
that it's not going to
first-
before us, it's
Right.
just for public hearing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different timeline.
Which we could also we could have an AR for that, but we could also just do it, right? I mean, we
Right.
could also just, as a policy, be like, we're going to set this, like we just did with 2 people who had NOVs. We could just bifurcate it or even instruct you ahead of time through a policy that we just do it, set
Yeah.
a public hearing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we now have policy code, but any first-time renewal comes back for public hearing. And really the genesis of that was because we had promised everybody these will come up for public hearing, and then we changed and said, well, no, there's really no need to put them all in public hearing. So that was to meet kind of just the promises we made verbally to people. So there wasn't really a promise on the endorsements
No,
to do that.
it had just
so.
kind of been a discussion as following. So that's an opportunity if the assembly decides they want to do that.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, just follow up on that.
Sure.
For the chair or whomever makes that decision, I would recommend that we just, as a policy, do that, regardless of what the AR, hopefully the AR comes out in time and we can do it, but, just as a policy, the first, probably very few, just 2 or 3, that we do that public hearing the first time.
Thanks. Anything else?
Yeah, I'll speak on that really quick. So I agree. I think we should make it as a policy, but I think this is just mirroring what we did for initially the marijuana establishments. We passed a resolution, so I thought it was a good idea for us to do the same thing here.
That's a resolution, right? That's something.
Okay, anything else on this? Chris, moving on?
I'll need a little bit of guidance on the penalties question. I don't recall that question, who it was directed towards, or what was the genesis of it.
Actually, I don't recall either, and actually I think the next 3 came from an email. So again, this is just me making notes.
Sure, that's fine.
So, and I just like, what are penalties? And I think we have some penalties, $300 a day for Title 21 violations. So we know some. So some of these things, if they're not really a thing, we can certainly move on briskly.
Okay, great. I'll move on from penalties and designated driver liability insurance. I'll only touch on the fact that all of these businesses carry liability insurance, but as far as changes to the liability insurance, once on-site consumption comes online, that's really going to be an insurance industry question. I almost can guarantee that they will see different rates, but that's for them to figure out.
Can I flesh that out then?
Sure.
Someone in the industry? Do all these operations have liability insurance? You were able
They're
to
not
get it?
required to have insurance by state law or any law, but for the most part, I can't think of one client of mine that doesn't have liability insurance, property insurance. But they're not required, but I can't think of one operator that doesn't.
Okay, so they're able to buy insurance.
Yeah, so it's they go into a high risk pool, and there's really only one servicer for the state, and so all the cannabis companies, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, you go immediately into a high risk pool. So you do pay a higher premium, but so far we've been seeing pretty good results with insurance. They've been holding pretty steady, not backing out, handling things when they need to. Of course, everybody has workers' comp insurance and stuff, and that goes through that same high risk pool.
So do bars have liability if someone drives away drunk and gets in a wreck? And if they do, is there insurance to cover that eventual thing? And if that's the case, can you get it for marijuana?
Used to be called dram shop insurance.
Called what?
Dram shop.
Dram shop.
So there's not the equivalent of that yet, but that doesn't mean that won't happen once this type of facility is legal.
Are there requirements that bars have such insurance?
I can't answer
Does
that.
anyone know? Dean?
I don't know if they require a certain type of insurance. But like Mr. Peterson said, there are dram shop laws, and we have that law, so I don't know exactly what ours says, but they talk about the liability for over-serving someone who's driven away. So I imagine that the same common law principles would apply here in terms of negligence and tort liability. But I don't have anything I'm aware of in the state statute regulations related to liability for certain customers.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
On the, going back to the designated driver thing for a moment, so I think the comment was made at the work session that, you know, in a bar, the idea is that someone can be there but not drinking, so they can be a designated driver. I think the actual practice is most people take a cab or an Uber, young people when they're getting to and from the bar, but regardless. Is it prohibited, and do we need to change the law? Is it, can someone enter one of these smoking facilities, theoretically, or now they're edible facilities, with their friends, and be there without consuming?
Of course.
Yeah. Because I think there was something said at the work session like that someone could go with their friends and be there, and if you wanted to have a designated driver.
So the follow-up to that, if I may, is if we're in a smoking facility, is the ventilation really going to clear the smoke so that someone could truly be a designated driver?
Well,
I think so, but
I mean, is the ventilation that good? I don't know. I think it's a question.
They would be no more at risk than the people that are smoking. Actually, they'd be significantly less risk because they're not smoking.
They would, but whether or not they were intoxicated or not by the time they left, I couldn't say.
Oh, you think that secondhand smoke gets you high? Like this?
I don't know. I don't know how good the ventilation is. I can
my
only...
understanding. Well, we get something from my understanding is very difficult to actually get a secondhand high.
that's my understanding, but maybe the police officers would have a better thought process on whether or not they've...
It's going to be an issue that comes before the body.
I misunderstood what their concerns were, but because my perception is that that's largely an urban legend, that you can get high unless you are really aggressively in a small space, like what's traditionally called hotboxing, that is extremely difficult to get, and certainly from a vaping product, you're not going to get something like that.
Mr. Chair.
It needs to be fleshed out.
Does someone with experience wish to speak?
Well, you know, for those of you who don't know, I work for a treatment provider, and I have the National Institute of Health website up on my desktop, and it reads here that while a person who's in an environment that has decent ventilation, not extreme ventilation, will have some THC, but not anywhere near the amount that would create an intoxicating experience.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll say just kind of briefly comment on that too. So my experience is not firsthand, my experience is with clients in the National Guard who sometimes test positive for THC, and they say, I didn't feel anything, and I was not intoxicated, but then it's their assertion that this happened. Whether or not it actually is true is up to the panel to decide, but yeah.
And that's along my line of thinking, is that if we have someone going in, it's just a set of potential litigation in the future where, it's just going to take, it's just a big set of unanswered questions. And so I think that was why I was asking.
Oh, I'm sorry. So it was you who brought that up again.
No, it wasn't me, but that's why I raised it here. And I think that it needs to probably discussed probably more in front of the full body as well, probably with APD and maybe the health department, because I think that's going to be an issue. Because we just need to get that information out one way or the other.
Yeah, the Title 21 concern, I guess, is whether or not folks are permitted, a theoretical designated driver is permitted to be there, and the answer is yes.
Under state law, the answer is yes. I mean, if the community felt really sensitive about it, we could do like oxygen masks or something. I mean, they're not that expensive, as an option for a designated driver.
We do at the code require each, on-site consumption area to have a smoke-free area for employees to monitor, the area, but I don't see why someone couldn't design that smoke-free area to be for an employee and the designated drivers, on the other side of a wall with a window or something. Nothing in code required. I don't think that's what we're talking about, but they could be innovative and do something like that.
Mr. Chair.
Chris, go ahead.
The whole idea of having a place for this type of use is for social use, to be social, like in a club, not to just get intoxicated and leave so that you're intoxicated. And so any idea that the person who came in to socialize, when the facts, even with the National Institute of Health, shows that you don't get high by sitting in a room with people who are smoking. It just goes against the idea of the purpose. The purpose is to create a social space for people, not, it's not a shooting gallery for heroin.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Thank you. Okay, we done with this? Moving on, can you allow events separate from retail?
So, through the chair, if this is a question about whether the licensed consumption area is a movable area that could be moved outside, for example, for an event, the answer is no. Can a marijuana retail establishment have a special event on premise but does not change or move the on-site consumption area? The answer is yes. But I don't remember the question from the work session, so if somebody else does, they can chime in. But I think the analog that maybe the question drafter was thinking is about like a special event permit for alcohol, which is a movable area, if you will.
Right. Didn't we? I mean, they were smoking at an event outside of the Sullivan Arena a couple of years ago.
That was illegal.
Okay, and that remains illegal.
Correct.
And Jed, is there any provision in state law to allow a temporary permit to have outdoor or consumption somewhere?
Not right now.
It's always got to be connected to an existing licensed retail. Okay. I think that answers that question.
Okay. Moving on, there is the question about requiring health warning signs in Chapter 10 or Title 10 currently. Mandy, do you remember the section? There is a requirement. 10 is it 1080?
It's 1080.
3335.
Yeah, and it refers to the health code.
I'm sorry, I don't have that handy, Mr. Chairman, but there is a requirement for posting signage. I'm sorry, it's in 1080-345. Oh, no.
Was that a result of the?
Sorry, 1080-360, thank you, 360. Correct.
Does that just regard marijuana shops in general?
Correct.
And what does
Retail.
it say?
There's a whole list of warnings. The first is marijuana has intoxicating effects and may be habit-forming and addictive. Second is marijuana impairs concentration, coordination, and judgment. Do not operate a vehicle or machinery with influence. The third is there are health risks associated with consumption of marijuana. The fourth is for use only by adults 21 and older, keep out of reach of children. And the last is marijuana should not be used by women who are pregnant or breastfeeding.
Okay. We'll go to Dean.
For the Mandy first.
So through the chair, the health department has a poster that they give to retail stores to put up, and it's addressing like these kinds of health warnings. So it's not the legal required label warnings, but they have one that they don't require to be posted, but I think everybody is.
Yeah, we put them all up, and I think we're all looking for new ones because they're getting kind of tattered.
You can pick those up at the health department, or you can download them from. You've got the link.
I have the link, yeah, and I can
Manny
forward that
forward you
around.
the link where they're at on the DEC webpage, or the HHS or HSS, EHSS.
Okay.
There's nothing requiring that they be provided by the health department. So in chapter 1080-365, sorry, I had the wrong section. 365 is the required consumer notices. And it does require that these notification signs must be at least 11 by 14 in size, and letters must be at least 1/2 inch in height and in colors that contrast with the sign background color. So roughly that's probably about 54 point type. It's pretty large. And those required postings for the marijuana retail store are: consumption of marijuana in public is prohibited by law. Transportation or carriage of marijuana or marijuana products on Alaska waterways, including cruise ships or by air carrier, is prohibited by federal law. Transportation or shipment of marijuana or marijuana products outside the state of Alaska is prohibited by federal law. And finally, providing marijuana to persons under the age of 21 is prohibited by law.
Mr. Chair.
Hold on, Chris, you're going to go to Dean.
Yes, thank you. So when we were discussing AO2 1966 that authorized on-site consumption for edibles, I forget if it's this committee or work session, we did toss around the idea of requiring another type of sign about consumption of marijuana. It's intoxicating, don't drive machinery, that kind of thing, but yeah, problem. But the one on the assembly decided to put that forward in the ordinance, so this isn't, I guess, a new issue. We did look at it before in the previous ordinance, as I recall.
Thank you.
And I guess the feeling was that these signs were sufficient. The labeling on each product was sufficient.
Forrest?
Right, so I guess, two things. One, I'm very open to this discussion if we feel there's additional signage needed. I don't think it's really appropriate to be added to this ordinance because we already have on-site consumption. It can be a standalone ordinance that applies to all on-site consumption regardless of whether or not inhalation goes forward. Is something we should explore. It sounds like we already have signage. What I think might be worth looking into is, retail spaces have to have signage now, and they do have this signage from the health department as well. But what they don't have is a separate sign in the consumption space. So perhaps if we were, and I think they'd be open to it, they have to come and get an endorsement. So it could either be a policy attached to the endorsement or a separate line in the code that just says if you have a on-site consumption area, it should have an additional sign. And I think the sign, so Chris, you said that the health department sign actually isn't required?
It's not required to be provided by the health department.
Oh, I got it. It's required to be had but not provided.
Those ones we pass out are about this big.
Okay.
They're really nice.
So if we were to require that one of those signs go into the on-site consumption area, I think that would be, that to me I think would satisfy, I think that would address those concerns and also maybe identify a small gap in our law, which is they have to have it, but they don't have to have it in that particular area. So maybe you have to have two if you apply for on-site.
Okay, it's got Chris Constant.
Thank you. Alaska is so funny. It has a love affair with these signs. I was on a cruise in South America, and I was on a ship that sometimes comes to Alaska, so there were those Alaska required signs all the way in Columbia. And one thing to note, though, about what you read, Chris, is that it's already out of date because the language should now read public consumption of marijuana is only allowed in licensed establishments. And so whatever language needs to be updated.
Through the chair, that's not entirely accurate. Public consumption means consuming in a public space. If you're on site in an on-site consumption area, you're no longer in public.
I think that would be, if you look at all other sections of our code, those places are still public. They're just regulated. And so, anyhow, we should be careful with our language, I guess.
Okay, I think they'll be pondered. Thank you. Crystal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not that this really, I think, is beyond what we're trying to do with this ordinance, but the conversation, I guess I just have to say, I think we're also going to have to include in those warnings that even if you're not if you're in a room and you're not getting high because you're not smoking yourself, but the odds of still testing positive for a drug test is still there, and that is a great concern for people who don't get an option in terms of being able to appeal that decision. I mean, if you're in the transportation industry, you're flying airlines, you don't get to appeal that. It's just, you're done. So that's going to have to be one of those warnings that people need to know, that you might not be engaging in smoking yourself, but if you are in that room, you run the risk of still testing positive for THC. So we just want to include that.
Thanks. Forrest?
So for Chris and for the health department, would you recommend, again, I think this is sort of separate from this on-site consumption, or this particular ordinance, because we already have this issue. We already have allowed on-site consumption, although just of edibles now. Would you recommend that we do an ordinance that addresses this specifically, or is this better done through policy?
Through the chair, if we're talking about changes to the code required signage and verbiage, should go through code, and that's where it lives.
So I guess I would ask both of you, and perhaps the industry as well, if you've seen some practical concern with these signs, to reach out to me. I'd like to be a sponsor of that, and I think it could go forward in the coming months. It sounds pretty straightforward. It would be an improvement to the language of the sign, and then an additional requirement that for places that sought the on-site consumption endorsement, they have a separate sign that is in that space.
In the consumption area?
Yeah, in the consumption area.
On the, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, on the note of coming up with an ordinance for additional signage, I think we would be wise to delegate the authority for the specific language to the department and instead make the requirement that it basically achieves the policy goals, because we could come back every year and change the signage as these laws evolve.
I'm fine with whatever the departments prefer.
Thanks, Chris. Jana?
I really like Ms. Kennedy's idea, and I think that particular sign maybe should be a standalone sign right on the entrance of the on-site consumption. So it's right there by itself, doesn't get lost in one. I think that's a good point, because you can get here and here too, and you could fail.
So for the right. So for the departments, yeah. So just to
We'll make a little subgroup.
Yeah, exactly. What Ms. Kennedy said, and which I agree with, is just notifying people that you can still test positive even if you don't consume.
Yeah, you could be on here. That's what
All right, good. Thank you. How are we doing on your list?
Freestanding is the next item. I don't have the list in front of me, but it asks the question, what is, thank you, define freestanding or remove it from the AO. For the second part of that question, I don't believe we can remove it from the AO, or it would not necessarily be advisable, since that's still a requirement in state law. And all of the marijuana retail, both retail licenses and on-site consumption endorsement licenses go through state review, and that is a requirement that the state will verify as whether or not it's freestanding. But to the broader discussion that followed, this is one I was paying attention to, when the broader discussion followed about what is freestanding, there was a request to look at the retail establishments in Anchorage currently and help us understand where freestanding ones are. Sounds like an easy task. Turns out it's not. And so this goes back to my laundry list of data points that the municipality does not currently collect, but we will soon be doing. And to help illustrate that, I wanted to reorient you to the handy municipal. For those of you on the phone, Chris, I'm at the GIS webpage. The municipality has a great GIS resource on its website. Maps and Apps Gallery is my favorite thing to do on a Saturday morning. If you go to the planning gallery down here in the bottom left, one of the maps that the planning gallery includes in it is marijuana, a really interactive map of marijuana licenses across the bowl. No pun intended. Right there. And one of the things that you can do with this, in its native form, when it initializes, you're going to see a lot of stuff. And what I'm going to show you is how to hone in on the important information. So over here, you have your legend. It tells you what each of the color dots are. Purple is all proposed, orange is all conditional, green is all approved. And then the shape of the dot or icon tells you what type of license it is. The protected land uses are also shaded on that map. What I'm doing now is I'm turning off the protected layers, land use layers, so that the map is cleaner. Now all we're seeing are marijuana licenses. And then lastly, pay attention to maps that have a little arrow at the bottom. It's called the attribute table. If you open that, what it does is it gives you the raw data of all of the licenses that you are interested in looking at. And if you zoom in, this data updates automatically to only include the area you're looking at. So I just wanted to reorient folks to that, because this was the tool that we used to start this analysis. So what did I find in this analysis? Well, turns out it's not terribly easy. So freestanding, just for reorienting folks, exists in Alaska Statute 1835-301I1, and it says that freestanding means a building that is not supported by another structure and does not share ventilation or internal space with an adjoining structure, and smoke from the building cannot travel into the adjoining structure. What we have interpreted that to mean generically is you have four walls and a door, right? And when you look at the list of, well, I'm sorry, I closed it, but when you look through the list of retail licenses that I showed a second ago, the first deep dive that you can do is looking into whether or not there is a suite number attached to it. So for example, here's one on 9800 Old Seward. The suite is 2A. Why are you not seeing what I'm saying? I'm sorry. There's something happening here. There we go. 9900 Old Seward. The red dot, for those of you that are looking at the screen, this is a suite in a larger strip mall. At first blush, I would guess that this is not freestanding, meaning that the demising walls between the retail store and the neighbor, which happens to be a bakery, may not be practical for allowing. Somebody's giving my jokes today. May not be the type of ventilation system that would allow for an on-site consumption area. So this is one where it would require probably a level of due diligence from maybe Bob's inspectors or land use enforcement, code enforcement, to go in and do the kind of deep dive to ascertain whether or not this can be classified as freestanding. You look at one like 4000 Chenard. This one's pretty clearly freestanding. It's 4 walls and a door, and there's a fence and yards behind it, so that one seems pretty straightforward to me. But then you get to some really complicated ones. This is 5200 A Street. This is over off of International and A. From the looks of it, it's got 4 walls, but if you look closely right here, I believe it has what's known as a party wall, meaning that this building is technically 3 walls, and its 4th wall is the back wall here of the Microcom building. And it's hard to tell without visiting on site, but based on this aerial view, you can very clearly see the CMU wall, the east wall of the Microcom building, and you don't see a corresponding wall for the 5200 address. So this is an area where we, I think, frankly, don't have complete data yet. But as these applicants, think about doing on-site consumption, this is something that the municipality is going to have to evaluate and ascertain.
I think so. So I've got a couple comments. So Crystal?
No, yeah.
Forrest?
Yeah, so I appreciate that, and I think that it's good to have a sense of what is freestanding and not. There are at least 2 places in the ordinance where it exists. There's near the back, the second to last page. Yeah, so in the code provision, it says marijuana consumption areas operated by a freestanding licensed retail marijuana stores. And I agree with Chris that should definitely stay in there. When we're constructing our code, it should comport with state code. I think the more interesting conversation is about whether or not it should be included in the ballot language, because the ballot language in the initiative doesn't have any impact on this particular requirement. It's certainly going to have to comport with the state requirement. And freestanding is a confusing enough term of art that I might take it out in the S version, because it's confusing, and it doesn't actually it doesn't actually deal with the heart of what the voters are approving. So.
All right, Chairman.
Thanks.
Through the chair, I think, and we've talked a little bit about this. I don't have strong opinions about leaving it in or taking it out. I just would remind the group that it's still state law.
Yep.
Freestanding is still a requirement, and any discussion about trying to require or define that needs to keep that in mind. When an applicant's going to AMCO with their on-site endorsement, they have to meet whatever AMCO's definition of freestanding is. And so far, the first case that we know of, it's not 100% clear. I don't know all the details of the Fairbanks applicant and whether or not it truly had demising walls between the suites, but that's what AMCO's dealing with. I do think it's good information for us to have locally as well, but for purposes of this ordinance or future code changes, relatively different on it because the state already does it.
Thanks. Meg?
Thank you. Actually, I have a couple of questions with regard to this. One, are we completely hemmed in by however the state interprets what's freestanding? Because the state said no when there were multiple tenants in a building is kind of my understanding. That was the essence of that decision. So are we interpreting, single tenant only? And then 2, can someone create freestanding through demising walls, and something we don't traditionally think of as freestanding? Because we've had this come up even with just retail, where there were concerns about odor, and the tenant agreed to put in a demising wall in a strip mall. So at some point, it may be that freestanding is not a term we want to consider, because it's truly, I mean, there almost needs to be a different term. I realize it's the term the state has left us with, but it doesn't really mean what the state says it means, because even the definition from the state suggests that you could create freestanding within something greater. But I'm really curious, can we interpret it different than the state? More restrictive, obviously. We obviously wouldn't be able to loosen it.
Through the chair, I think that you're absolutely right. When it comes to creating additional layers of code, municipal code, you can be more restrictive than the state. You cannot be less restrictive. But I think ultimately the definition of what is freestanding, or how we're willing to interpret freestanding, can be something that the municipality adopts its own policy, if you will, on how we will look at it. And I think that any policy about freestanding really needs to focus on the code required air quality issues with both the consumption area, the retail area, and then by extension any neighbors, should it be part of a suite. That it's going to be hard to write code around. I do think it can be handled via policy, but it's going to be a case-by-case basis. No two suites are the same, and I think that's going to be the challenge.
Can you go, Pete? Did you?
All right, thank you, and I was wondering if Jed had any information. Is this something that the Marijuana Control Board is going to be looking at, maybe defining freestanding, or is that on the agenda? Do you know?
I don't know. I think that they're going to wait and see what happens with the field.
From the Fairbanks case?
There's no pending regulation project to change that one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Jed, feel free to chime in if I'm misspeaking here, but it's my understanding that the state actually hasn't come out with a formal determination saying if you have more than one suite in a building that you're no longer freestanding. I believe it was just a 50-50 split of the Marijuana Control Board, where half the board felt that because you had two suites, you were not freestanding, and the other half felt that came down to a ventilation issue. So they haven't really, that license was not denied because of a majority vote who felt that you had two suites. It was a split vote, and therefore denial by default.
Okay, thank you. I go to Janet.
So just to clarify that, and I don't represent the Fairbanks cut, so I wasn't involved in that conversation, but I watched it. The issue there was a non-related tenant in that same building. So the industry's understanding of freestanding, at least when the bill was going through the legislature and the regulations were passed through the State Control Board, was a building that the marijuana company occupies, and maybe the marijuana company has another company in there for the cultivation. So it'd be like a retail and a cultivation owned by two companies, but that's all that was in that building, and it was a standalone building with no other uses. So that's how we interpreted it, and so I think that's how Marijuana Control Board ultimately fell on the issue, and I understand it's under appeal right now, but the thought process was always not to have other uses other than marijuana uses co-owned by the same entity or the same group of people in that one building. So the suite numbers is a little bit of a murky water, because AMCO requires us, so even if, say, take Smonty's building on Tudor, for example, it's a freestanding building. Underneath is suite number 200, just off the top of my head, I don't remember if that's actually the suite number. And then the top is the retail, and that's another suite number. So there's two suite numbers there, but there's only two marijuana licenses there, and they're owned by the same company. Obviously, that is a freestanding, so the suite number thing might not play exactly into what you want to achieve, because AMCO has made us define where the licensed premises are at by suite numbers.
All right, thanks. Dean?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to note that, like Mr. Dunbar said, I think that the issue of freestanding is really part of this battle proposition or this ordinance, but it is in our current code, and it is an issue. It's in section 3 on page 2 of this ordinance, line 29. Current code we already have in subsection A, freestanding license local retail marijuana store. That's language we added with AOQ 1966. I think, though, that I would agree with Mr. Dunbar, we should take freestanding out of that proposition question language, summary of what it does. But otherwise, it's an issue we should deal with separately by separate ordinance, not this one. However, I just want to ask, the language I just pointed to in 1083-6A, it applies to both 2A for selling marijuana butter flower and B, selling edible marijuana products. But I understand the state had draft regulations out, and I wonder where that was in the process in terms of changing their regulations so freestanding wouldn't apply to on-site consumption of edible marijuana products if the business only sold edible for on-site consumption. So they had those draft regulations out for comment, I guess in June. But do you know where that was in the process? They're still looking at changing that?
Yeah, I think the question was to allow for on-site consumption of just edibles if it's not a freestanding building. In other words, if there are other tenants. That has not been adopted yet, so it's not effective yet, but I know that it's something that the board is considering.
Okay.
But that's just for edibles only, it's not for smoking.
Right. Okay, good, thank you. More on this, so Dean, did you have more on that?
Well, I would like to add one other thing. So the language we've got freestanding, or where the state got freestanding from, in AS 1835-301 that Mr. Schulte put up on the screen recently, this is part of the state's second-hand smoke control statute, and this language here has we're basically saying in 301D1 that an individual may smoke at a retail tobacco or e-cigarette store that is in a building that is freestanding or attached to another business or building, separate ventilation and so forth. They seem to address, at least for this tobacco second-hand smoke control, a separate building, four corners and separate entrance, and a plaza or a building that has several suites or units, and they treat those separately here. So I would be a little surprised if, at the end of it all, the litigation that's going on, Fairbanks, whatever, that they find freestanding can apply to building several units or suites. I just don't see that happening from a legal interpretation sort of perspective. You look at this second-hand smoke control for tobacco state law, and by comparison, what they meant by freestanding, we put the definition for there, wouldn't apply to, I think, a building with several units.
Okay, thank you. So, moving on from this, so you're going to evaluate for an S version, taken out of the ballot measure.
Yeah, and talking to just a process point, because some of our colleagues have asked for a significantly longer timeline on this, and several meetings where I think different ideas for S versions will come about. I don't intend to put forward an S version on September 10th. I will probably hold off so we don't have an S1 and an S2. I want to hold off and get all the suggestions and then eventually do an S version.
Okay. But we do see a need for fine-tuning somehow with freestanding means. And are you working on that in planning then?
Mr. Chair, we can have our own internal definition of it, but again, we're still bound by the state's definition of it and how they're interpreting it.
I think, Mr. Chairman, if I may, where we ultimately would resolve the issue of greater clarity or definition on freestanding will be a coordinated effort with zoning, building, and then AMCO as well, just to make sure that we're not stepping too far out of our boundaries. I do think there's merit in having more clarity locally, even if the state doesn't choose to move or amend its definition of freestanding. Again, these are all going to be different, unless it's truly freestanding like Great Northern or somebody. Each one's going to be case by case. It's good to have some policies in place from Bob's perspective to evaluate.
Mr. Chair, I would add that the term freestanding isn't quite how the building code would probably look to it. They would look to something like structurally or physically separated. So to the extent we want the same language to mean the same thing in different parts of the code, I think it bears further scrutiny and maybe recommendations to the state to revisit their terminology.
Yeah, that could be a benefit. You know, when we start our process, as soon as the state says, hey, we got their application, it looks like they filled in all the blanks, right? But it doesn't mean that the state has said, yes, it's a freestanding building that's required. So if we have something tighter, we can maybe address it once it comes to us and say, that's not freestanding by our rules, whatever the state says. So really, we can't just defer to the state, really, or we're kind of setting ourselves up to, I mean, what do? We approve the license pending state approval. But in some ways, we leave people hanging.
Well, we go to the state first, right?
So we can't submit our special land use permit until we get a completed notification from the state. That takes 75 days. Usually within that time frame, we're gonna hit a quarterly meeting. So it's unlikely that you get into a situation where you approve a marijuana store without the state approving it.
Yeah, but our preference, Mr. Chairman, would be to provide greater clarity to incoming entrepreneurs, particularly if they don't already have a retail space, so they would understand what to look for.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, if they were hoping for on-site consumption, but get a space that no way is going to work.
Right.
So, okay, so we'll get greater understanding of freestanding and maybe an expert. Moving on, we have 20 more minutes.
We should be able to move relatively quickly,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. The next request was for a text of the secondhand smoke control ordinance. I think the clerk's office has a handle on that. We just sort of dealt with the map of freestanding stores. More to come on that. The building code rules on room capacity are more appropriately fire code. You heard Bob address that earlier. I feel like we answered this at the work session, but there was a question asked as to whether or not a retail store could be only for consumption. So they would have a small retail area, but the bulk of it be set aside for on-site consumption, and we don't see how that could not be allowable. So there would still have to be a separate and distinct on-site consumption area. So there will always be some portion of that total gross square footage that's set aside for retail and point of sale and employees, et cetera. But you could do that, I guess. I don't know if that would make money, but you certainly could. The next item is flesh out the issue with per current code in the ballot language. I think that was a Dean question and Mr. Dunbar, but I looked to somebody who can help.
How much? What does that mean?
I don't know. There was something about per current code.
The language in the initiative says things for current code.
Oh, the marijuana, the
27.
so the word, that was the issue. If the code changes, are we locked in any way? And I thought that was answered at the work session.
I don't know that it was completely, and I think Dean had some comments later, but yeah, because current code is mean whatever it is today.
Sure.
As opposed to changes. So, I think, Dean, did you have a recommendation on that?
Yeah, we should probably change those 3 words. I'm not sure exactly what, but I did have a conversation with Mr. Wilson about how that might be confusing or misconstrued to mean we're electing on the code on that date, people vote on it, and we don't want that. That's not what's intended. So I'm not sure exactly what language I would have, but our current code seems to be, I guess, maybe perhaps some. I will work on some.
So I think you can get where you want, but that one add to your list for an S version.
Yeah, I mean, one solution would be to just remove everything after that comma, right?
Just remove current. Per code.
Oh, per code. Yeah, that's a better idea. Per code for all marijuana establishments. Yeah, that works. Get rid of current. That's a good idea.
Okay.
Great. Look at that, fixing all these problems. Okay. Moving on, Health Department's policy on edibles, again, that went through the clerk's office or is pending, if it hasn't already. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Adding something, I assume this is in reference, oh, I'm sorry, Dean, do you have a question?
Yes, if I may. So I talked with Mr. Hickman from the Health Department, and I have some email communication with the director, Natasha Pineda, talking about some language to add. So we will refine some language and propose it for this version in terms of not allowing employees to enter the on-site consumption area.
So that's the next one that we're going to tackle. which is the adding I assume this is to code, adding provisions to code that make it clear that employees are not required to enter an on-site consumption area while there is marijuana smoke present. And I don't see why we couldn't do that in consultation with Mr. Hickman and AHD. That would be also something to include in your S version, Mr. Dunbar.
So that's the question I wanted to ask. Is it appropriate for, I'm sort of thinking out loud right here, I think it is, for a separate section of the S version or for a standalone ordinance? I certainly don't think it should be part of the, maybe it could be referenced in the ballot language, but probably not. I think it's more like one of these additional sections we have at the end here. Is there a preference as to, either from my committee members or from the department, as to whether it's added to the S version or is it standalone ordinance?
I think it's added to the 1665 changes.
But we're talking, I mean, I'm open to that if it's a relatively short, you know.
Like one or two
sentences,
Great.
yeah. Through the chair, I think that's probably the most appropriate one because part of the ballot is referring people to the code changes that become active upon voter approval.
Yeah.
And I think that demonstrating that employees will be, the needs and concerns of employees are going to be addressed is a good policy decision to include ballot language.
Okay. Let me go, Dean.
Yeah, thank you. As Mr. Dunbar said, I think that would be a few sentences here on page 4, the new A5, and it would fit. But I think that this, we've already pointed to a few things that maybe a separate ordinance is appropriate for, and sort of 3 things that this combination maybe address the question. Should this ordinance include sections 3 and 4 that amended 1080 and 1665 at now at the same time? And we designed it that way. I thought that was most efficient and effective, that people could see exactly what would happen. But another approach is, I think we mentioned at the work session, we could just do the ballot question and that's it, and have a separate ordinance for implementing, if the ballot proposition passes, implementing code changes as a separate ordinance, developed in the spring. So that's just another approach we could talk about.
Okay. Forrest, did you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like the way that Dean, we talked about this in the work session, I like the way that Dean has constructed this, where there are certainly other details that are going to have to be worked out in code and in regulation, but he's put the most important understandable portions here in the ordinance, so people understand that there are these sort of strictures placed on the, even if on-site consumption is approved. And again, we're kind of caught in this thing where voters often say, well, we don't know what you're going to do after we give you this authority, and this helps solve some of that. So I do like the way he's done it here. He's still keeping pretty short, and I'm sympathetic to the health department employee that just said, let's put it in here as well. So the S version, if we can figure out the language, the S version, my S version will include something about employees not having to go into certain areas.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just as this is getting crafted, I mean, this is, employees are not required. Should it be permissible or should it be a shall not? So just well, okay, so the language we're provided in the questions is a little bit different.
Yeah, it's kind of along the lines of like if you have a private club, if there's language in the code that says it can't be serviced by an employee, it's kind of similar, to keep employees from being exposed to the secondhand smoke. So it's nothing to say you can't do it at 2 p.m, but if people are there smoking, we wouldn't want the employees exposed to that smoke. So if everybody leaves, they can hang their poster cleaning signs, clean the place up, empty the ashtrays or whatever, and reopen it for use for smoking.
All right, thanks. Is that your comment? You want to get the queue?
Well, no, I had another thing too.
Who is that?
Steve Hickman.
Jeff.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
Yeah. If we're thinking about changing 1665, there's a bunch of other stuff in there that's now out of date thanks to the state smoking ordinance. And I know this may not be, if you were going to split it out and do it separately from the ordinance, it might be worth it to fix the whole thing because like our minimum distance to the front door to smoke, just not marijuana, is like 5 feet, but state code is 10 feet. So now the de facto rule is 10 feet and ours is less restrictive. So, and I sent you guys a list of that a few months ago about the changes. So we can probably come up with that list again and get it back to you if you want it.
Send it to us in a well-crafted ordinance form.
Yeah, we'll separate that out.
Okay, yeah, but I just wanted to make you aware that aside from these little changes, there's other changes in that ordinance that need to be made.
Correct.
So, to make it line up with state ordinance, just that the second-hand smoke stuff. So, anyway, that's all I had with that.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
And that argues for an alternative vehicle for coming up with any changes to the smoking codes and this as well, that we should keep the ballot question as clean as possible and attack issues of comportment with the smoking ban as a whole process.
Okay, thanks. Forrest?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I like the idea that, you know, there are other ordinances that we need to get passed, no question, regardless of whether or not this passes. My question is, so we already have a code for smoking tobacco in certain places, and you said employees are restricted from going there, correct?
Right, then like
Right.
the private club part.
Right.
Yeah.
My question is, and it'll have to apply to this too, is there like an emergency or exigency exception to that? So if someone were having a heart attack or if someone were engaging in violent behavior, can an employee, do they have to stand, like there's a glass wall, they have to stand outside the glass wall and call the police?
I don't think any enforcement person would come in and write you a ticket because you went in there to save somebody's life or to.
And through the chair, if I may, during the discussion on on-site consumption by edibles, you heard from AFD and APD that in the case of an emergency, they don't care, they're going in.
Yeah. Yeah, they're going in. The APD and AFD thing, to me, I'm curious about the employees. But so right now, there isn't that exception for the private clubs for tobacco, but it's just assumed that it's an enforcement issue?
We would not enforce that if it was an emergency situation. And, you know, the only way we're ever even going to know that somebody's violating that is if they complain. If somebody complains.
And through the chair, in the Title 10 sections dealing with on-site consumption of marijuana, it does mandate or require a separate area for monitoring. It does not prohibit the employee from entering the area, especially in a case of emergency. So if someone had a heart attack and if a marijuana licensee responded, they didn't violate any law.
But we're about to add language to perhaps prohibit them from entering while people are smoking. I mean, that's what my understanding is what's being asked.
So we could say that during the normal course of employment, which would preclude an emergency, you know, like to clean or to fix it or maintain ventilation, you know, the normal stuff you would do in there as an employee. That's what we're aimed at. We're not aimed at keeping anybody from going in there to stop an emergency or whatever else might go on.
Okay, we'll work our way around here. I got, Chris, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, just only that, again, I go back to my experience at Anchorage Yoga where you walk into that room and you can't even breathe. There's so much disgusting sweat in the air, and they hit a button, and within 10 or 15 seconds, the air is breathable, and within a minute, it is clear. And so I believe that the vendors, the kind of entrepreneurs in this will come up with a system that works to ensure that their staff don't have to go into a room that's filled with smoke.
Good, thank you. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's saying employees are not required to enter while there is smoke. Could they voluntarily enter? Do the employees have the right to enter on their own volition if they're not too worried about the secondhand smoke? That's my question.
I think the way that we were going to write it is that they're not allowed in there when smoke is present, other than emergencies. I mean, obviously, we're not going to stop an emergency situation if there are places that cause smoke, but it shouldn't be with proper ventilation. But while people are actively smoking, we just want to prevent the secondhand smoke exposure to employees, and because not every employee that works there probably doesn't want to be exposed to that. There may be some that don't care, but some might, and they may or may not ever say anything to their employer about it because they like their job. So, so that's what this would be at. And we're looking at like the whole maintenance. We're not looking at emergencies. You know, if you got to rush in there to, you know, because somebody just had a heart attack or seizure or who knows whatever, an AFD or DPD go in, that's, you know, no code enforcement agency's going to write a ticket for that.
Great, thank you.
Emily?
Just wanted to make a clarification clarification on the reference in the old Anchorage smoke-free ordinance regarding private clubs. That private club definition, by definition, has no employees, and the definition of employee includes volunteers. So this is a very, very isolated situation. It's not comparable to the situation we have here because there are no employees in those places, and I only know of one place that actually meets that definition.
All right, thank you. Janet?
So I guess I kind of missed it. So now we're considering adding on to the voting ordinance a prohibition that employees can't conduct their regular duties in that on-site consumption area?
While smoking is present in the area. So when people are in there smoking, they can't go in to service the area.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess so this isn't gonna be a big economic engine for these companies, right? So they're gonna have to figure out ways to make this thing viable and feasible. Because it's also, it's providing a place to smoke so that people don't go smoke in the parks, right? So they're gonna be wanting to sell sodas in there and coffees and things that are not infused edibles, brownies that don't have marijuana in them. This would be very difficult if they can't enter the area when people are consuming.
I think that leads to a later question.
Yeah, so through the chair, we talked about that during the on-site consumption by edible discussion, and the idea of allowing the sale of other products still has to occur outside of the consumption area anyway. So it will not be the responsibility, should not be the responsibility of the employee to bring things to a customer inside of the consumption area.
So then customers are going to be coming out and you guys don't see an issue with that? Keeping track of people going out and then knowing exactly who they are?
The responsibility of the operators.
Granted, but I think there comes a tipping point where it's tipping towards the point of this is, almost a business hazard to even engage in because you're going to be very much at risk of violating all these regulations. Coupled with you can't even keep people in one spot because they have to come in and out. Seems like a difficult twist that I wasn't aware that we were going to embed into this voter ordinance.
I just share my experience because I do that at Bosco's. We have a separate venture, but often it's closed off for staffing reasons. People have to come back and forth, and they go in there, play their game, and then they come in for more sodas and cookies and snacks.
Can they only play one game at a time, one game a day? Do you have to make sure they only play one game a day, or otherwise they'll shut down?
But you have to have a system for tracking anyway because you're limited on how much you can
Yeah,
sell
but we
in a day
can't
anyway.
keep people's identification information. It's prohibited in the original ballot initiative that passed in the state. We can't take Alaskan or any person's IDs and store their information. So we have to do it on eyesight and human tracking.
Can you hold their ID?
You can't. I don't think you can. I don't know if
Could
you
you
can hold.
physically put it in a box like here? You're going in on-site because I'm gonna give your driver's license. Here's your
Brewery
brand.
holds my credit card.
Yeah, I mean, that's not in the regulations, but it is required by the Alaska law that you cannot hold their identification information. So I don't know if that qualifies within the holding of, recording, holding.
If you're a visitor to one of these sites, they give you a lanyard with your name on it.
If you're a restricted access visitor, yes.
Maybe you create those for people that are in the consumption.
So that's a different process. Restricted access goes into where the marijuana is being stored, packaged, grown, or produced. So this is a consumer. It's carved out in the law that we cannot retain people's identification that are consumers to protect them from things that you don't want people knowing that.
That's an interesting point. Meg?
Thanks. I always envisioned that these rooms would be staffed like the front door, like to even get in the store, that there would be someone there checking IDs and kind of just like constantly there. And so the idea that that person is also at a counter or something with drinks and snacks.
Well, there's multiple people that staff.
But I saw this always as like kind of that one, like that is the gatekeeper in and out.
So the other issue,
and that's going to be a single staff person likely during those times.
So the other issue is we're required to remove unsmoked product that is abandoned or uneaten product that is abandoned like pretty quickly. And so if there's smoke in the air, I'm not sure how we can, and we're not supposed to go in there, how do we go remove the unconsumed product that has been, quote, abandoned?
Mr. Chair.
Chairman.
Hang on, let me go to Chris Schutte first and then Constance.
So just a couple of points. The only obligation for the licensee on an on-site consumption endorsement is to monitor for overconsumption and to make sure that outside product is not being brought in. So, I don't know, Janet, maybe I'm not overthinking this, but it seems pretty straightforward, and the example you gave, Estelle, tells exactly what I picture. You're a gatekeeper. The employees have to can only sell a certain quantity to individuals per day, and then those those customers take that product into the consumption area, and the person monitoring the area is monitoring for overconsumption and making sure you didn't sneak in a joint, or also, I should add, that you're not consuming alcohol or tobacco in the consumption area. Upon completion of your visit, if there is unsmoked product, the customer is allowed to take that product with them. So again, the idea of having to dispose, I think there will certainly be cases where a customer leaves and says, I've had enough of this product stinks, I'm going to leave it behind. And in that case, there will need to be disposal. But this is set up so that a consumer can come in, purchase the products that they would like to consume either on-site or off-site, and they have the option to consume a set amount of those on-site that day and take whatever they don't consume with them. So I think it's going to be relatively easy for staff to monitor this.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to our time. Chris Constant.
I just want to reiterate that the concept for the use is to create a lounge environment, a place where people would socialize. It's not just a simple utilitarian function. In our bars, people are allowed to purchase alcohol and also non-alcohol and food, snacks, etc. And so I'm hopeful that whatever path we walk down this, we keep that in mind.
But bars, you can't smoke in bars now. So smoke is the issue. Okay. So
actually, it's food or other items as well.
Okay, so we kind of running out of time here. So we have gained a better understanding of impairment caused by smoking. We have 2 APD officers who have been very patient for 2 hours, and we're not going to get to you, but we have other meetings. So, and then the final point is the smoke-free workplace an impossible hurdle? And we heard no ventilation system can clear 100% of smoke particles. And I would defer, given the time and plus these topics, that's probably a good health committee / public safety committee topics.
Mr. Chair, we do have a few minutes, so we can hear from the APD officers.
We could, if you have time.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that I assume that we're going to have the same kind of testimony in public safety committee, but I don't know. They didn't wait if they'd like to speak. I
guess it depends on what the concerns are. Is there any questions?
We have a specific question right here.
Yeah. Thank you. And my question is just in regard to current enforcement of public consumption of marijuana and what kind of situations you're seeing. Giving out citations to somebody that walks outside of a marijuana shop and then lights up and then walks around downtown. Anyway, just kind of curious as to what you see and how enforcement of that's going.
Anecdotally, I'm not on the enforcement end of it, neither is the investigator Buckton. So I don't have the stats as far as what we've written, but when we do come across it, we do expect our officers to take action.
I mean, it's a $100 ticket.
Well, I don't have that stat in front of me, I'm sorry.
I believe that's correct.
It's $100.
Okay, so I think when the health department, or health committee and public safety committee meet, because you had some good presentations when we were looking at edibles.
Well, as far as the effects of edibles, and that's one of our concerns. And I believe during the last edible conference, we were talking about there are different statutes that say that the bud tenders or bartenders there have to monitor and go through a TAMS or TIPS class for consumption and overconsumption signs. Our concern, one of our concerns, is that the classes are adjusted to not just show the signs of alcohol intoxication, but also signs of marijuana intoxication or overindulgence, if you will, so that the folks serving them are trained just like any other bartender or waitress there or waiter.
Sure. Forrest?
But that's all at the state, right? That's not municipality. The TAMS
I don't know where that
process.
statute lays in, if it's state or if the community has a common. I thought it was state.
Yeah, I could be mistaken. I thought all the TAM stuff, alcohol serving, is all state stuff. So I think that that's a good suggestion. I'm not sure if we can, what kind of action we can take on that.
We're gonna have the same issues there for place for public consumption in bars.
Oh, I see. You want us to create a separate, like, municipal licensing scheme for people that serve marijuana specifically, that would have that kind
Piggyback
of
on
training?
the same requirements that bartenders have to have and servers have to have for alcohol.
Interesting.
Well, they do have to get a license.
The TAMs or tips card, they're required to take it for alcohol. I don't know if it piggybacks on there.
So we have a
They're on
merit,
a separate handler's permit.
Oh, so the handler's permit has, but there hasn't been on-site consumption until this year, but they were already getting some training on this stuff?
Yeah, so they have to update their handler permit classes every 3 years, and I think Dean probably just.
Okay.
I was going to just mention I talked to Eric and Econo at the state at one point last summer about whether they were going to update their marijuana handler permit training course to address the on-site consumption issues. They contracted out to a third-party vendor, right? But I believe she did say that vendor was going to update that training, but I didn't know any details.
So there's multiple vendors, maybe Judge Better person.
There was a regulation that actually just went in, sorry, Jed Smith, AMCO, there was a regulation that just went into effect last week, or actually on the 21st, that says that anyone that provides the marijuana handler training course has to update their course whenever a new regulation comes into effect, within 10 days of that new regulation coming into effect, so.
That's a new rule going through stresses. Okay.
Good.
Mr. Chair,
Chris?
I don't know who the officer is, but if I could ask, Ms. Kennedy asked a question about enforcement, but the one thing that people get really up in arms about, and I understand this, is enforcement of intoxicated driving. Can you speak on that at all? I think pretty much nothing has changed. You still have the power.
That's correct. I mean, we don't determine what the intoxicating substance is until after we've made a decision to arrest. And that's based on the impairment that the officer in the field sees. So it would be handled just like any other impaired driver arrest, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's pills, opioids, or marijuana.
Or even being too tired to drive.
That would be pulled over, and we would assess that as part of the assessment process for why that driving behavior is witnessed.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. So anything else? So we've actually made it through our list fairly well. We have at some point undetermined, probably a mega meeting with the public safety and health to deal with this, and possibly more, another work session at some point when the S version comes forward with some modifications. So for people who are here, so I think Emily and Kathy, so you're able to keep abreast of what's going on, and you're on the email list, I think. Is that working okay?
Actually, I'm not sure I am on the email list for this committee, but I'll talk to you.
I am sure.
Okay, and Mandy can handle that.
Yeah, if you want to give me your email, I can put you on.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Kathy?
I'm not getting any notices from the other two committees.
Okay.
Is there an email list for them as well?
I expect
At the
so.
FCC, I've not gotten notices of, I believe, of those other two committees. We've certainly got notices at the FCC on this list. So I distribute them as per the interest of the direction of the chair here. But I haven't seen any others.
Okay.
I will send those out if you request me to do so.
Okay, so we want to make sure that you get notice on those. So.
And the FCC.
But since everybody got a chance to talk, and we can have public comment, Eugene, anything to say? No comment from Eugene?
Move to adjourn.
All right.
Second.